So H. Paul Rico was a real trendsetter. I mean, this guy, it's basically common knowledge now throughout the United States about all the stuff that happened in Boston with the FBI regarding John Conolly and Whitey Bulger. But there was stuff that came way before then. It's maybe not so common knowledge. I mean, guys who follow this genre and are well studied in it know all about H. Paul Rico and his partner Dennis Condon and all the stuff that they were doing in the city of Boston decades before Whitey Bulger and John Conolly were even around. So today we're going to discuss H. Paul Rico in this video because he's the one who started the trend of the FBI being so heavily involved in the underworld in Boston and really pulling the strings. The FBI were the puppet masters in the underworld in Boston. They picked the guys who were going to be the main players, who were going to be on top during the conflict between Winter Hill and Charlestown. They picked the winner of that, and everybody kind of joined behind. The FBI, if the FBI did not want you to succeed, they were going to make sure that you didn't. And if they wanted you to succeed, they were going to make sure that you did. They propped up the guys that they wanted to, like their informants and their guys in the underworld. They propped them up and they gave them what they needed to succeed. I mean, like Whitey Bulger really wasn't that big of a name. I mean, he was in federal prison for the majority of the conflict between Winter Hill and Somerville. He came back out. His crew, the Colleens, his boss was Donald Colleen, and he got wiped out in the smaller second war that happened between and Southie. And basically, Whitey Bulger, he really wasn't much of anybody. The FBI, the whole point of why I'm saying this is because the FBI propped him up and made him into like that. He was like some sort of giant crime like lord, you know. They had the whole city of Boston all sewn up, and he ran the whole city. I mean, it's not true, you know. So let's talk about H. Paul Rico here. So H. Paul Rico is from the Boston area. He grew up in the wealthy suburb of Belmont. Like Belmont's just west of the city, and it's a gorgeous town. I mean, you wouldn't know that you're a couple minutes outside of the city. It's just a very like Wellesley, Newton, Brookline, Belmont. These are all beautiful communities right west of the city. Like it's crazy how close they are to the city and how like beautiful and tranquil these places are. So he graduated in 1944 from Belmont High School. He attended Boston College. I believe he might have been in the service for a little bit, but he joined the FBI very young. He was 26 years old when he joined the FBI in 1951. And this was kind of like the trend. J. Edgar Hoover was like, this was in the early years of the FBI when they were really starting to kind of build their power base. I mean, it was at this point, J. Edgar Hoover was basically handpicking the agents in the early stages, and he liked guys in their 20s or early 30s, clean cut, you know, guys that went to universities that came from probably more like upper class, like affluent communities and families. And there's always the long-standing rumor that J. Edgar Hoover was a closeted homosexual, and he picked guys for agents that were also may have also had those same proclivities, because back then in the 1940s and 50s, it was not okay to be openly gay. And there was always a big thing about that with J. Edgar Hoover, that he was a closet cross-dresser, he was a closet homosexual, that he wore pantyhose like under his suits to work and stuff, and that he had his little boy toys that he picked specifically as special agents that he knew were closeted gay too, and that they could have secret little relationships with. So the reason I'm saying this is because H. Paul Rico, it was long stead rumor that he was this prototype, you know. Howie Carr writes extensively about how Whitey Bulger and H. Paul Rico knew each other from way back because they used to frequent the same gay bars in the Bay Area, in the Bay Village. I guess back in like the 1940s and 50s and stuff, there was an underground gay scene in this area, and there was clubs and bars that were known to be like gay hangouts, and guys went there to pick up other guys, and that these younger guys who were hustlers who would basically go there and as like prostitute themselves or like swindle older gay guys or whatever. And Howie Carr has always said that Whitey Bulger used to do that, and I've never read it anywhere else from anywhere else. I've heard maybe like rumors that Whitey was a closeted or did this stuff when he was younger and stuff, and used to go into gay bars and lure guys out and rob them or actually turn tricks and stuff. So I mean, there's always, I've never read it anywhere else. Like I said, like there's just rumors that, you know, Whitey did this stuff, but Howie Carr is like dead set. He was always dead set, but I always thought like it was just kind of a personal thing. Howie Carr, very much personally, it was like a personal thing. Like he did not like Whitey Bulger. Obviously, a lot of people think Whitey Bulger is a very unsavory character, and the stuff that he did is very like awful and stuff like that. But Whitey, like Howie Carr, had like a personal thing, and he used to write like he used to always try to make him look as bad as possible. But H. Paul Rico arrested Whitey Bulger when Whitey Bulger did the bank robberies in the 1950s, and he was on the run. There was a warrant out for him, and he had this like terrible dye job where he dyed his hair black, and he thought nobody would recognize him just going out in the Boston area with like jet black hair. And they ended up arresting him and some of the other guys that he was with at the Tide Lounge. This guy Ronald Dermody, who I'm going to talk about later in the video, he was part of this bank robbery crew that Bulger got hemmed up with, and it was like 1956, I believe. Yeah, 1956. That they were driving across the country. They performed the bank robberies in a couple different states, and that's why it became like a federal case. And he ended up, Bulger went to like Leavenworth in Kansas, and he went to Alcatraz and stuff like that. But H. Paul Rico was the one that made the arrest on Whitey Bulger. But apparently, Howie Carr says that they've known each other for years because they used to frequent the same gay bars in the Bay Village back in the day when Whitey was wearing his like leather outfits and turning tricks. Howie Carr says this, not me. So, so H. Paul Rico was from Belmont, which is like I said, it's a very wealthy, affluent town. Came from a wealthy family. He went to Boston College, and he's like a very, you know, I don't know how the way to put it, but you know, the collar turned up type of crowd. That's the type of people that H. Paul Rico came from. Now, his partner on the other hand, Dennis Condon, came from Charlestown, and from all accounts, he was from a working class family in Charlestown, and it was like they were very two different people, you know, came from two different walks of life, but apparently they were a very effective pair in the underworld, and these guys really did. When I say that the FBI were the puppet masters in the underworld in Boston, especially in the 1960s when the conflict of Winter Hill and Charlestown was going on, these guys determined the outcome. They got all in with Winter Hill. H. Paul Rico probably had a man crush on Buddy McLean because Buddy McLean was a handsome guy. He was all into him, trying to help him in any way, form that he can. And these guys developed a very, very, very close relationship. And H. Paul Rico hated the McLaughlins from Charlestown. He absolutely detested. I guess, you know, in the 1960s they were putting up all these illegal wiretaps. The FBI was trying to cover ground because J. Edgar Hoover had said for decades, for years, that the Italian Mafia didn't exist. There was no organization, blah, blah, blah. And then when they found out that that was completely the opposite, that there was this really intricate national crime syndicate that was controlling every aspect of life in America, not even just illegal, but labor unions and stuff like this, like legitimate. They were infiltrating to legitimate businesses now. He changed his tune, and now they had to pay all this catch up and gather all this information. So what they did is they started setting up all these illegal wiretaps all over the place, and they couldn't use this information to prosecute. It wouldn't hold up in court because it was illegally obtained, but they gained a shitload of information. They found out who was what and who were the players and who was doing what, and they found out what was really going on. But while this was happening, apparently, they picked up on a wiretap from the guys in Charlestown, and they were making fun of Rico, and they were saying about how he was in fact a homosexual and he was doing this stuff, and he used to go to the gay bars and all that stuff. And Rico hated these guys. Like, he wanted them not only like locked up, and he wanted them dead. So like I said, the two main factors that these guys got in the closest with was Winter Hill with Buddy McLean, and then they also spent a lot of time around Wimpy Bennett's Roxbury crew, because we know Wimpy Bennett, talked about in previous videos, how he was very close to law enforcement. He had Bill Stewart, the detective from the Boston police, in his pocket. He'd pay him, he'd get information from him, he'd give information. Wimpy Bennett was a rat. And so Frank Salemi and Steve Flemmi, his underlings, watched him, and they thought he taught them that it was good to have these police contacts. Like, back in the day, like, it's not like it is now. Like, the police and gangsters were so, like, Boston was so corrupt back then that, like, these guys were so close. Like, they used to interact all the time, and it was perfectly normal. It's like, you couldn't be a gangster and be successful and not have police contacts. You needed to know what was going on, where the investigations were, and it was like just practice. It was just like procedure to pay off cops. Like, you could not operate in the city unless you were paying off the cops, or else they'd knock you every day. So I mean, it was just like different back then. You know, now there's all these safety nets to make sure like that cops aren't corrupt and they're not taking payoffs, and that gangsters and cops don't have personal relationships and stuff like that. But it wasn't like that back then. These guys were so closely intermingled. So basically, H. Paul Rico and Dennis Condon were like around the Roxbury guys all the time, and they originally drafted Jimmy the Bear Fleming, Steve Fleming's brother. So originally Steve Fleming wasn't the original informant. It was originally Jimmy the Bear Fleming. But Jimmy the Bear was like a loose cannon. This guy was like dropping more bodies than probably even Joe Barbosa back in the 1960s. So like the trend of like getting these violent criminals who are out there committing the worst type of crimes and getting them as informants. Like, I've never understood that about getting the person who's out there who's the most dangerous person. They're the one that's committing all the violence, and you're gonna get them as an informant to lock up other guys. Like, they were so dead set on getting the mafia and locking the mafia guys up and shutting down the mafia that they were willing to do business with the worst people out there. Like Jimmy the Bear. Like, the video I made about it, titled "Serial Killer Gangster," because he was like this guy. He just killed. It was like he enjoyed to kill. He was a deranged like lunatic, and he was all messed up all the time. He was always on scotch and Seconal, and they drafted him as an informant. But the one problem that they did have is they found out that Jimmy the Bear was also working as an informant for the Boston police, and he was taking money from the Boston police. And they let him know that after he was shot by Spike O'Toole and he was in the hospital. They said, "Listen, Jimmy, you can't be working as an FBI informant and taking money from the Boston police as well. You can only get paid from one law enforcement agency." You know, they had to have some sort of scruples or some sort of values somewhere. You know, they had to draw the line somewhere, and that was it. You can't take money from both of us, Jimmy. So, I mean, Jesus. So Steve was introduced, you know, mostly to H. Paul Rico through his brother and the relationship he had with his brother. And then when they met Stevie, they were like, all right, this is the guy that we're looking for. Because Jimmy was a loose cannon. This guy's out there. He's murdering everybody. The guy was just a lunatic. So, I mean, they wanted somebody that was a little more stable, and Steve Fleming was perfect. This guy was in the mix. He was in with the Italian Mafia. The Italian Mafia wanted to draft him because he's 100% Italian. He's proved himself to be a capable killer. He's an earner. So he's in contact with the Italian Mafia, but he's a free agent at the same time. He's not a main member. So he's out there and he's intermingling with all these different groups. So he is exactly what they want. And that's the whole thing, too, is like they marked out Whitey Bulger to be like, John Conolly tried to be like, Whitey Bulger help the FBI take down the Italian Mafia and blah, blah, blah. Whitey Bulger never even gave any of the information that they used against Angiulo to take him down in the 80s. Like, it was all Steve Fleming who drew like the diagram of the doghouse. It's always been Steve Fleming. He's always been the top echelon guy that the FBI has always wanted. So when they found him, that was the diamond in the rough. So they were working him and Frank Salemi. Like, Frank Salemi was really tight with these guys, maybe even more so than Fleming at first, because Salemi, H. Paul Rico one day was like at the dog track or the horse track, and he's supposed to be in the office or was making up stories. He's out in the street doing work. He ends up getting cocked at the track, and he gets into a fender bender and does some damage to his FBI. It's his like work car. It's a service car. So he has no housing explains. He's drinking at the track. He crashed the car. So he brings it to Salemi's garage, and he's in a huff. Oh, yeah. So Salemi does him a solid, fixes it. He doesn't even pay. I don't even think H. Paul Rico paid him for the work, and gets him out of trouble. So now they're building like this bond together. And then after that, H. Paul Rico thinks he can trust him a little bit. And George McLaughlin's on the lam. They have the warrant for him for the William Sheridan murder. The Charlestown crew has basically become scattered at this point. It's like the mid-60s, like 1965. H. Paul Rico shows up to Slemmy's garage, and he says, hey, we found out where George McLaughlin's hiding out. He's with Spike O'Toole. I need a throwdown weapon. I got some guys here. We're going to go in, and they're in on it, some of the other agents, and we're gonna throw a weapon down and say that Georgie drew on us, and we're going to kill him. I'm going to take Georgie McLaughlin out. H. Paul Rico was going to kill him. He's going to murder him in cold blood because supposedly Georgie called him a homo on a wiretap. This guy H. Paul Rico. This is what I'm talking about. This guy was just as much of a gangster, or he was like more of a wannabe gangster than these actual so-called real gangsters. You know what I mean? This guy he was a piece of work. So Salemi gets him the gun. Salemi got him a .38 caliber gun. He said, "Yeah, I don't know what he was just maybe thinking of getting good favor with FBI agent. Maybe he'll come in later." Like the good favor will come in later if I need help sometime down the road. So we get him to throw down weapon, but H. Paul Rico didn't do it because he said that there were 6 agents, 5 are on board, but 1 was a holdout, and they didn't want to shoot him because they thought maybe the guy would tell on him or whatever, so they didn't do it. But this guy was willing to kill a guy in cold blood just because they were saying remarks about him, like disparaging remarks on the wire. So they was developing a really close relationship with Frank Salemi. They were trying to work him as an informant too because they saw the value in him as well because he's out there, he's integrating with the mafia, all different groups, a treasure trove of information. But they ended up losing him when the Teddy Deegan murder happened, and they had Joe Barbosa as the star witness perjuring himself, and he's putting in these 4 Italian guys, Henry Tomiello and Peter Lamone, who are bigwigs in the mafia, and then Joe Salvati and Louis Greco, who are, these guys aren't even gangsters. Joe Barbosa put them in for personal reasons. And so everybody on the street knew all this. Everybody who was involved in the street and had stuff going on, they knew that these guys didn't actually commit the murder, that Barbosa committed the murder. He was trying to protect Fleming, and the FBI was co-signing all this bullshit, and H. Paul Rico was like behind it, pushing all this forward because he didn't like these guys, and he was trying to push Barbosa as this big witness that they found, and blah, blah, blah. And so Salemi called them out about it and was saying something about it, and Dennis Condon, H. Paul Rico's partner, said to Salemi, "How do you think Louis Greco likes it on death row?" And Frank Salemi said, "How do you think you're going to get past you bearing false testimony?" He pulled out some self-righteous bullshit about how you're going to get past St. Peter at the gates of heaven. Like, who's Frank Salemi to say shit like this? Because he murdered people in cold blood. But I understand what he's saying because it's true. Like, these are FBI agents who are supposed to be upholding the law enforcement agents, and they're putting innocent people on death row and then making jokes about it. Like, how distasteful is that? I mean, I'm not even like related to any of these guys or have any personal involvement, but just as a human being, man, that just really grinds my gears and rubs me the wrong way. So it did to Frank Salemi, and he distanced himself from them after. But Steve Flemmi did not, because Frank Salemi, I get the names are so similar. When I say them both a lot, it almost gets tricky. Like I'm gonna start crossing them up. But Frank Salemi, like we know, he ended up going to prison for the John Fitzgerald bombing. The lawyer of Joe Barbosa, and Steve Flemmi ended up going on the lam, and they brought him back. He kept making contact with H. Paul Rico every year, so every couple months, checking in with him. They finally said, "Coast is clear, you can come back." Salemi ate the charge. He went away to prison. Flemmi's back on the street, and now he's the man. He's the top echelon informant. You know what I mean? So H. Paul Rico, basically, and then let's get back to Buddy McLean. So he's working Buddy McLean, and to get in Buddy McLean to like really seal the deal, they've been working together. He's been trying to bring him in, to seal the deal. This guy, Ronald Dermody, who I mentioned before, who was part of the bank robbing crew that Bulger was with when he went to prison in the 50s, into federal prison for the interstate bank robberies. Ronald Dermody was part of that crew, so he knew H. Paul Rico because H. Paul Rico was the arresting agent. So anyways, Ronald Dermody's trying to hook up with Dottie Barchard, Spike O'Toole's baby mama. This girl just got around, man. I don't know. She must have had that, super whatever, because these guys... Ronald Dermody wanted her so bad, he's asking the Charlestown guys, he asked somebody for help or whatever, to help him bump off Spike so he could have Dorothy. And the person said, "Yeah, just take out Buddy McLean." This is what the story goes. It's one of those things that could be a bunch of bullshit that's been passed down and written in books, and it's not even true, but it's a good story, and I'm going to tell it. So he walks into a bar in Somerville, Ronald Dermody, sees the first guy that he thinks is Buddy McLean, he takes a shot and he misses. It's not Buddy McLean. Word gets back to Buddy McLean. This guy, Ronald Dermody, is out there trying to kill him. And Buddy McLean's all paranoid at this point before he died. He was drinking heavily. He's paranoid. He's got like a notebook, I guess, and he's like writing down license plates. And if people from Winter Hill are like seen, conversing with the enemy, he's writing down that. So anyways, So somebody tells him this guy Ronald Dermy's trying to kill him. So Ronald Dermy freaks out. Oh my god, I tried to kill Buddy McLean. I missed. He knows I'm after him. He's gonna fucking kill me. He calls H Paul Rico. He goes, I need your help. Like, he tells him the whole story. H Paul Rico goes, hey, and yeah, you're in some trouble. Okay. H Paul Rico still lives in Belmont. He's got his house in Belmont. He goes, come meet me in downtown Belmont in an hour. I'll meet you there and we'll figure this out. Hangs with the phone, calls Buddy McLean. Hey, buddy, Ronald Dermy is going to be at this address in Belmont. Blah, blah, blah. I told him to meet me there in an hour. So Ronald Dermy is there an hour later. He's smoking cigarettes, pacing back and forth. Where's Rico? Where's Rico? Rico doesn't show up. Buddy McLean shows up, pops him, kills him right there in downtown Belmont in this beautiful, quiet, tranquil town. He drives a mile away to H. Paul Rico's house in Belmont, hides in H. Paul Rico's basement while the cops swarm the whole Belmont area and close down the town so nobody can get in or out. And they're trying to find out who did this like brazen murder in broad daylight in downtown Belmont. So Buddy McLean stays in his house for about a day or so until the heat dies down, and then he leaves, and then after that, it's sealed. He knows he can trust Rico. Rico knows, hey, they've formed their bond and blood now, and now Buddy McLean is an FBI informant. That's correct, folks. Buddy McLean, who everybody thinks the king of Winter Hill, like the toughest guy who used to fight everybody, and he's like the people's champ, he had an FBI file. I'm sorry, and that's why these guys, Winter Hill, wiped Charlestown off the map. Charlestown was the more lethal crew, and, if the FBI and the whole city of Boston didn't get behind Winter Hill and take their side, who knows what would have happened. It could have been a much different story. But this is like the truth of what was going on. The FBI was in the streets. They were intermingling with gangsters. They were doing stuff that law enforcement agents, that's not what they're supposed to be doing. That is not their purpose in our society. They're not to be picking sides and pitting people against people and taking out people that they don't like for personal reasons. They're not trying to uphold the law or trying to make the city safer. The city was a friggin' war zone and a killing field during the 1960s. And then again, later, in the 1990s, the whole thing repeats itself with a whole new set of FBI agents and a whole new set of gangsters. Well, some of them are still the same. We've still got Flemmy and Whitey Bulger and Slemmy's back in the mix as well. But H. Paul Rico was an FBI agent from 1951 until 1975. But even after he retires in 1975, he's still in the mix. He gets his boy John Conolly. He sets him up. He gives him Frank Slemmy's. It's supposedly John Conolly just bumped into Frank Slemmy. In a city of 7 million people in New York City, he just randomly bumps into the guy in the street who's the most wanted fugitive, right? He didn't get tipped off or nothing, right? Okay, please. So John Conolly bumps into Frank Slemmy, captures him, arrests him, and that's how he punches his ticket back to Boston. What do you want, Mr. Conolly, our young fine agent from FBI, for making this huge arrest and doing the agency good? What would you like for your prize? I'd like to go back to Boston, sir, where I'm friends with Billy Bulger, who's about to be Senate president, and it's the most corrupt city, and I can get whatever I want and basically act like I run the town. That's what I want. These guys were so friggin' narcissistic and just they were sociopaths. I don't know how else to classify H. Paul Rico and John Conolly as sociopaths, narcissistic sociopaths. So my point is, Rico gave him that information. He helped him. He knew Conolly. They're both Boston boys, so he picked him and he put to replace him as his agent. So John Conolly comes there the same year in 1975 that H. Paul Rico retires. John Conolly comes back to Boston. So it's these guys have so much sway over the city, and it's for the whole second half of the 20th century. People don't realize how deep this shit goes. I'm telling you, man. I'm not fucking being dramatic about it. This is for real. So he still had his tentacles in the Boston Underworld even after he retired. He's retired down in Florida, but he's still involved. He's still with Conolly. He's still pulling strings. And in 1981, when Bulger and Clan find out that they're about to be losing a bunch of money and that their boy John Callahan, their crooked CPA, might get arrested and go to jail and might give them all up because this new guy Roger Wheeler bought the world, I don't know how to say it, it's this weird racquetball type game, Jalhala. I can't even pronounce how it is. I've read it a million times in books and I'm not even going to pretend to try to say it out loud. But he bought this company, and it was a company that they were extorting and stealing a bunch of money out of, and this new owner bought it, and he was found out they're cooking the books, and they knew it was all going to go. So they were trying to tie up loose ends, and they killed Wheeler first, and they killed Callahan after. But Flemmy, I mean, John Conolly, the FBI agent, was very intertwined in this, and he actually went to prison for life for setting up Callahan's murder. But H. Paul Rico gave them guys the information about where Roger Wheeler was going to be. So my point is, like, I might have just gotten a little crisscross talking about Conolly and the Callahan thing too, but the two murders were connected. The Roger Wheeler and the John Callahan murders were both part of that same situation. But H. Paul Rico from retirement is giving information about, okay, Roger Wheeler plays golf at the Tulsa Country Club at this time. This is his tee time that he has every year. He gave up the time. This is where you guys gonna hit him. From retirement, he's still doing this shit. So that's my point. That's where I'm getting at. So obviously, thankfully, all this shit caught up with these guys. Conolly's in prison for the rest of his life right now for the John Callahan murder that I just talked about. He was already doing 10 years for obstruction of justice for all the stuff he did to try to keep Bulger free and to try to all the dirt he was doing. And then when it came out that he set up Callahan for death, and he was also involved with the Roger Wheeler, and H. Paul Rico gave up the tea time in the country club for him to be murdered at. These guys were both arrested. Like I said, Conolly's in prison for the rest of his life where he belongs. Before H. Paul Rico was arrested and put in prison, though, in 2004, before that happened, he was called in front of a Senate committee hearing. They had a committee hearing about all the FBI corruption in Boston and all the crazy stuff that had gone on. And they said to him, like, do you feel bad? Like, you're not showing any type of remorse. We're talking about 4 innocent people you knew about that they were innocent, and that this guy was perjuring himself and putting them into prison on false testimony that they were innocent of this crime. 2 of the guys died in prison, and these other 2 guys lost 30 years of their life, couldn't see their children grow up, all this stuff. You don't have any remorse whatsoever, Mr. Rico. His exact words as Con was, "What do you want from me? Tears?" Like, what a piece of shit. This guy's a piece of shit. I'm sorry. People would tell me in the comments sometimes that I should leave my personal opinions. No. I'm going to give my personal opinions. I'll try to do, like, I'm not a journalist. I mean, so what I do is kind of, like, journalistic. I'm, like, reporting on stories and stuff like that, and bringing you guys, like, information and stories from the past that are very interesting. I think they're interesting, and a lot of people seem to be interested in it. But, like, my personal opinions are going to be intertwined in here, too. Like, this guy was not a good guy. He was a bad guy. And he died in prison. And I think that's what he deserved. You know what I mean? He died in an Oklahoma prison hospital by himself, alone. And apparently when they came and arrested him in 2004 in his house in Florida, he defecated in his pants. Imagine with the McLaughlin guys. They must have been smiling somewhere, wherever they are, wherever Punchy and Georgie and Bernie are, and the Hughes brothers. They must have been smiling somewhere when they heard that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this upload about just some. It never ceases to amaze me when I talk about this stuff. Like the levels, like people don't. I think they understand like that there was like some really shady, despicable stuff that happened in the city of Boston, and the FBI was behind a lot of it. But I don't think they understand like the depths of it and how far back it goes and how deeply entrenched like this corruption is. Like it was, like I said, like H. Paul Rico is a trendsetter. He started this stuff. Him and Dennis Cohn in the early 1950s, they started like the trend of like just of FBI agents being way too deeply involved in the underworld and criminal affairs. And it's just insane. And then it carried on with John Conolly, Special Agent Morris with Bulger and Flemmy, and then they end up getting Slemmy to turn, and then the whole thing with Mark Rossetti as well, and that would carried on to even past John Conolly. Like after even the stuff happened with John Conolly and Bulger, like Agent Buckley supposedly had a violent criminal as an informant still. Even after all this stuff happened, they're still doing it. But people have told me that that's not all entirely true, and there might be more of that story as possible, but I don't know because I haven't talked to anybody. Like apparently Mark Rossetti, he listens to some of the stuff, watched my show. I was told from a person that he respects the stuff I do. He didn't appreciate really the Boston Mafia War video and the stuff that was said about him, but I was kind of trying to defend him, saying that like there's no proof that he committed these murders, because on the Project Marino, they're painting him out to be like a serial killer all the time while he's an FBI agent, and he only did 12 years in prison. But what I looked up, there's no physical evidence or anything besides them just people making accusations that he committed any murders. So like I would love to talk to him, and I understand he doesn't want to be on camera, he doesn't want to be talking unrecorded, and I swear on my children that if he contacted me and he didn't want to be recorded, like I would not record the conversation. But I would love to talk to him, and I'd love to hear his side of the story. But anyways, like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. I'm enjoying doing these videos where I'm just talking unscripted and picking like a different topic every day, and I can do kind of quick uploads and get them to you guys faster and more often. And from the views I've been getting, it seems like people are enjoying them as well. I erased the last video that I put up because I didn't really like it that good, and I just had already written the script, so I decided to do it. And then after I put it up, I was like, I don't really like this. It wasn't really getting that many views. It was demonetized, and people were starting to troll me on it and stuff. So I put it down. But I'm gonna keep doing these guys because you guys seem to like them. Hopefully like every day, at the least every other day, I'll keep coming out with new videos. So have a great day, guys. Like I say, always make good choices, take good care of yourselves, your family, your loved ones, other fellow human beings. Have a great day. I'll talk to you guys soon. God bless.